To discuss further, we're joined now by Rainbow Murray, politics lecturer at Queen Mary University of London. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme, Rainbow. As we heard there in Selena's report, they've opted for chaos over responsibility, according to supporters of Barnier. So what happens next?
What happens next is uncertain. In the immediate term, the current government has to continue in a caretaker capacity. But the pressure is now on Macron to appoint a new government quickly. Last time it took him 2 months. I don't think he can afford to take 2 months now. So he has to get a new government in place as soon as possible. There's also the problem of not having a budget. There's a deadline of the end of December to get a budget through. If that deadline isn't met, then France potentially faces a shutdown scenario, as we see in America, where no civil servants can be paid. We'll probably see emergency legislation to carry over the previous year's budget until a new budget is in place. But that won't help to address inflation nor the growing deficit. So France is really in a position of turmoil right now.
And all sides blaming the other, as we've seen this evening. Who is ultimately responsible for the collapse of this government?
Oh, that depends who you ask, because everybody says it's someone else's fault. A lot of people are pointing the finger at Emmanuel Macron, and part of the point of this censure motion was to put pressure on Macron. If you listen to the left, they're not even particularly fussed about the specific circumstances that led to this. They were looking for any opportunity to bring the government down because they felt bitter that they weren't made the government in the first instance, having got the most votes after the recent election. The far right are trying to stir up trouble. They're trying to deflect attention away from their own legal wars. Marine Le Pen to run the presidential election. So they're all playing their own particular games. The people who seem to be the most constructive out of all of this are the Socialist Party, the moderate left, who are saying that they would potentially be willing to build a more collaborative government in the wake of the fall of the current one, hoping that the left might now get some recognition and that they could work together with Macron.
And you mentioned Marine Le Pen there. How does the far-right leader come out of all this?
She's taking a huge gamble. She has spent the last decade or more trying to build the respectability of the party, trying to present the party as a potential party of government, a serious party rather than a party on the fringes. And she is now placing the country in a state of political and economic turmoil by bringing down a government that was actually doing a lot to try and appease her and her voters. She's facing anger, for example, from farmers who are potentially part of the her core electorate because they're concerned about the economic repercussions of this. So she is trying to position herself in a situation where she might potentially be able to run for president at the expense of her reputation in the longer term.
And Rainbow, how much of a disappointment is this for Michel Barnier after successfully negotiating Brexit on behalf of the EU to end his political career like this?
Obviously, no one wants to go out having achieved nothing other than the record of being the shortest ever serving French Prime Minister. But he can also truthfully say that he was dealt a terrible hand coming into this. He was really set up to fail. He had no majority in Parliament. Parliament was split 3 ways, with 2/3 of Parliament against him from the outset. So while he's achieved very little, one could argue that there was not much else that he could have done.
We're due to hear from the French president tomorrow evening. Sources say he wants to appoint a new Premier Minister potentially before the reopening of Notre Dame this weekend. Is that feasible?
It's feasible if Macron can decide on somebody and that person agrees to do it. Macron faced stumbling blocks previously because he didn't want to appoint anybody from the left because they were threatening to overturn the pensions legislation that Macron had staked so much of his presidency upon. We're now seeing a slight shift in the left between the far left, with whom he's still not willing to work, and the moderate left, who were previously aligning themselves with the far left, who might now potentially be willing to work with Macron. If they are, that offers a glimmer of hope. If not, then he's probably looking either at a loyalist from his own party or potentially even some kind of technocratic government, which is a possible solution but won't last that long, given that it doesn't have its own democratic legitimacy.
Who do you think might be in the running? Are there any particular names that spring to mind?
A couple of names have emerged from the political centre. One is the current defence minister, who is loyal to Macron, but also respected by some of the far right, and therefore potentially able to keep them on board. Another is François Bayrou, who is from the Modem party and has previously run for president, who also has a certain degree of sympathy from the far right, even though he doesn't share their politics, just their legal battles. Either of them might sit well with Macron. Whether they would be able to command any kind of majority in parliament is another question altogether. The alternative is that he looks to appoint a socialist in an attempt to bridge the moderates on both the left and right alongside the centre.
There'll be huge challenges, as we say, for whoever does take on this position. Is it a poison chalice, so to speak?
Absolutely. It was a poison chalice for Barnier, as we've seen. It's a poison chalice for anyone who takes it on, because the maths of Parliament hasn't changed. We still have three fairly evenly sized blocks who cannot work together, and we still have 7 months before the cards can be redealt, before another parliamentary election can be held. So I think anyone who comes into this role is going to struggle to achieve anything, but they can't get away with doing nothing, because France urgently, desperately needs a tough budget that can address its spiralling deficits. So it's the worst of all possible hands, but someone is going to have to step up.
May hear in the coming days who that might be. Rainbow, thank you so much for your time on the programme this evening. That is Rainbow Murray, politics lecturer at Queen Mary, University of London. Well, the left and far right